My name is George Whitman. I turned 70 this year, though some days it feels like I've lived 100 lifetimes. I always imagined old age would be quiet mornings, the familiar smell of coffee and rain, a few phone calls from family just checking in. But life doesn't always let you rest. Sometimes, it waits until you're fragile to show you who truly stands beside you, and who's been standing behind you, waiting for you to fall. You see, you never really know someone until they stand to gain something from your ruin. I wasn't born wealthy, but I worked hard enough to give my daughter Lily a comfortable life. When she married Ryan, a charming man with polished shoes and expensive words, I wanted to believe he loved her. I even handed him the keys to my business accounts, trusting he'd help her manage things when I retired. Trust. That word feels almost foolish now, because the night I learned what Ryan was truly capable of, it wasn't my money he wanted, it was my disappearance. Betrayal from a stranger hurts. Betrayal from family rewrites your soul. That night was cold, the kind of December chill that clings to your bones. I was at the train station, waiting to head home after a late meeting. Ryan had offered to give me a ride, but called halfway there, saying he'd meet me at the platform instead. I didn't suspect a thing. I saw him walking toward me, hands in his pockets. That same polite smile he always wore. He said, "George, we should talk about your estate plan." And before I could even answer, I felt his hands on my back. Then nothing but air. Some goodbyes aren't spoken. They're shoved into the dark. I hit the tracks hard. The scream of an incoming train echoed through the station, and for a moment, I thought it was over. I remember the blinding light, the metallic taste of fear, and a stranger's voice shouting, "He's alive." Then everything faded. I woke up 2 days later in a hospital bed, broken ribs, a fractured leg, tubes and wires keeping me alive. The police said witnesses thought I'd tripped. Ryan must have told them that, of course. He did. The cruelest lies are the ones people are too afraid to question. Lily visited once. Just once. She held my hand, trembling, whispering that Ryan said I was getting forgetful. But maybe I'd fallen by mistake. But her eyes, they told a different story. Guilt sat heavy in them, like she knew the truth, but couldn't speak it. I didn't ask her to. I only told her I'd be fine, because deep down, I knew that surviving wasn't luck, it was permission. I had unfinished business. When fate saves your life, it's rarely out of mercy. It's usually to let you finish the story yourself. For weeks, I lay there, replaying that moment on the platform. The push, the fear, the betrayal, and beneath the pain, something new began to take root. Calm, cold, quiet. Quiet. Ryan thought I was done for. He was probably already moving my money, preparing to sell the house, maybe even planning a tearful story for Lily about how sudden it all was. But I've lived long enough to understand one truth. Greed has an appetite, and the more you feed it, the hungrier it gets. Sometimes, you don't need to destroy your enemies. You just need to let their own hunger eat them alive. When I finally left the hospital, I didn't go home. My name wasn't even listed on the discharge file. I'd asked for it to stay that way. Ryan believed I was gone, and for once, I wanted him to. I rented a small room under another name, 2 towns over. My cane creaked with every step, but I didn't care. I had time, and time was my greatest weapon. Revenge doesn't always come with fire. Sometimes, it wears patience like armor. I spent the next few weeks quietly digging. Old contacts in finance owed me favors, and I called in everyone. Slowly, piece by piece, I began to uncover what Ryan had done. Accounts moved, properties transferred, my retirement fund restructured. He'd been planning this for months, maybe years. I almost admired the precision. Almost. But the thing about men like Ryan is they never think the person they betray will outlive their betrayal. He thought he buried me that night, but I was only planting the roots of his own downfall. Every scar on my body reminded me of that train, of that moment when everything went black. But each morning, I woke up. I felt stronger, not in body, but in purpose. I didn't want revenge that looked like rage. I wanted justice that looked like truth. And when it came, it wouldn't be loud or violent. It would be quiet, elegant, and permanent. He took the balance from under my feet, but I would take the ground from under his life. And so, my plan began. When the hospital doors closed behind me, I didn't go home. The doctors said I needed rest, therapy, patience, but I knew there was no peace waiting for me in that house. My son-in-law Ryan had already laid his claim to it, and my daughter, Lily, well, she was trapped between love and loyalty. I couldn't make her choose, so I vanished. Quietly, like a ghost fading into the biting December wind. I found a small cabin 2 towns over, right near the old railway. It was a cruel kind of poetry, really, the same kind of tracks where he'd left me for dead. 4 days, I just sat there, listening to the trains whistle by, each one a piercing reminder of how close I came to disappearing forever. You know, sometimes the silence after a betrayal is louder than the act itself. That first week, all I did was think. Every memory of Ryan played on a loop in my mind. The first time Lily brought him home so charming, so polished. The perfect gentleman. He brought flowers, shook my hand with both of his, and said, "You raised an incredible woman, sir." And I believed him. I really did. When he proposed, I gave them my blessing and a down payment for their first home. That wasn't just money. It was trust. The kind of trust a man spends a lifetime building and gives away only once. I learned a hard lesson. The people who smile the widest often hide the sharpest teeth. While I was in that hospital bed, healing, Ryan was busy thriving. I was a majority shareholder of my own investment firm, but during my recovery, he somehow convinced the board to transfer management rights to him. He told them I was mentally unfit after the accident. Later, I found the legal documents. My signature forged so perfectly it sent a chill down my spine. My own creation, my own company, had turned against me. Every contract, every employee who once respected me, now answered to him. It hit me 10. Ryan didn't just want my daughter. He wanted my entire legacy. Greed doesn't start with money. It starts with envy. My body was weak, but my mind was as sharp as ever. I still had friends in the legal world, old contacts who owed me favors. I started digging, quietly, tracing paper trails, watching accounts, studying the patterns. I discovered Ryan had been siphoning money from the company's mall. Subtle transfers disguised as consulting expenses. They were all accumulating in a new corporation registered under a fake name. But he made a rookie mistake. He used one of my old shell companies to launder the money. And that company was still legally in my name. When you start digging into a thief's world, you often find he left the shovel right there for you. I spent weeks turning that little cabin into a war room, mapping out every transaction, every name, every fake invoice. Papers covered the walls, connected by lines drawn with old markers. My hands trembled with age, but my purpose kept them steady. I had been weak on those tracks, but now something stronger was taking hold. I learned that revenge isn't about anger, it's about arithmetic. And I was about to solve for justice. The smartest revenge isn't loud. It's Lejardib. Then Lily called. I'd ignored her first few attempts, not ready to hear the inevitable break in her voice. But one evening, I finally picked up. She was whispering, as if hiding in a closet. "Dad," she started, her voice cracking. "Are you alive?" I told her I was safe, that I was fine. She broke down crying, telling me Ryan had convinced everyone I'd had a stroke, that my mind was fading. He was even trying to get her to sign over power of attorney. A cold knot twisted in my stomach. "Don't sign a single thing," I told her, my voice firm. "And don't say a word to him about me," she promised. I could hear the fear in her tone. Love can make people lie, but fear makes them silent. That call lit a fire under me. I had to move faster. I reached out to an old friend, Marcus Hawley, a retired lawyer who'd owed me a favor for 30 years. We met at a dingy diner off the highway. When I walked in, leaning on my cane, he froze as if he'd seen a ghost. "George," he whispered, "everyone thinks you're dead." I managed a faint smile. "That's the point. Over stale coffee." I laid it all out. The forgery, the fake accounts, The betrayal. Marcus listened, his eyes narrowing. You don't want the police, he said. More a statement than a question. You want leverage? I nodded. I didn't want Ryan in handcuffs. I wanted him in ruins. Justice through the system can be slow, but justice through wisdom is precise. The next few months were a blur of quiet, calculated moves. Under Marcus's name, I hired a private investigator. I used my offshore funds to anonymously buy a small share of my own company, just enough to get access to the board's communications. And what I found made my blood run cold. Ryan was planning to sell the entire firm to a foreign investor for 3 times its value. He was going to pocket the money, shut down everything, and vanish. 40 years of my life, my entire legacy, torched for a quick payout. Some people burn bridges. Others will torch an entire empire just to feel the warmth. That night, I stood outside the cabin, the wind howling through the pines. I looked up at the stars, the same stars I used to watch with Lily when she was a little girl. She once asked me, Dad, you always say the stars look like promises. Do you think promises can die? Back then, I told her no. Now, I wasn't so sure, but I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Ryan had broken every promise that ever mattered, and I wasn't going to let him just walk away smiling. Because broken promises are a lot like debts. Sooner or later, they always come due. So, I set my plan in motion. I created a new account using a fake corporate name. Whitman Holdings. Through a network of dummy investors, I leaked false interest in buying the firm. Ryan, greedy as ever, reached out personally to negotiate. He didn't know he was talking to me. Not really. He was talking to my intermediaries. Every email, every message, I tracked. I wanted him to put in writing every single illegal move he'd ever made, and he did. Greed always loosens the tongue. If you want to catch a snake, you have to let it think you're just part of the grass. For weeks, I played the part of an investor's representative, sending subtle questions, drawing him deeper and deeper into the web. When he finally sent over the draft agreement, a smile spread across my face. It was all there. Proof of fraud, insider trading, and falsified valuation numbers. One single document, and his entire life could collapse. I printed it, folded it neatly, and placed it in a drawer right beside my bed. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. The sweetest dreams, I've found, come to those who plan the nightmare. But I knew that wasn't enough. I didn't just want to destroy his company. I wanted him to face what he had done. I wanted him to face me. Because sometimes, true justice isn't in watching someone fall. It's in watching them realize who pushed back. He thought he had buried me under the tracks, but I was the train coming back for him. When the first tiny ripple of panic finally hit Ryan, I could feel it from 2 towns over. He thought I was gone. A closed chapter. But greed is loud and careless, and loud men always leave footprints. I began by feeding a whisper to just the right ears. Under the Whitman Holdings name, I hired a discreet financial intermediary who knew exactly how to look like a serious buyer. We're talking crisp emails, detailed due diligence requests, even a brochure that smelled like billions. I wanted Ryan to believe he was about to be bought by someone who would offer him everything he'd ever dreamed of, and in exchange, he would write himself into a paper trail that could never be unstitched. If you make a man believe he's about to win, he'll hand you the map to his own downfall. He took the bait like a starving man at a feast. The messages started out polite and businesslike, but soon slid into cock. We've got this under control, he told a board member in an internal memo I later obtained. Everything's moving smoothly. The old man won't even know what hit him. He used that same phrase in emails. The old man. Casual, dismissive, final. Those words just made my plan sharper. If he would write his contempt into memos, he would also reveal his illegal shortcuts. If he was willing to brag, he'd eventually admit to fraud. And if he was engineering a sale, he'd put every dirty number on a spreadsheet. I needed paper, and his own greed handed it to me. Arrogance writes the confessions you can only read with a ledger. Meanwhile, Marcus and I worked on the outside. Marcus called in favors of the registry office at a quiet branch of an auditing firm, and to an old banking colleague who still respected the Whitman name. I hired a private investigator, a man named Ruiz with soft eyes. but a razor-sharp memory. He started shadowing Ryan's closest associates. Where Ryan went, Ruiz went 2 steps behind. He photographed meetings, recorded boasts in dimly lit bars, and turned whispered promises into solid evidence. Every scrap of proof was catalogued and put into 2 thick binders. I labeled Paper Trail, Whitman versus Ryan. I read through them each night, the printouts crinkling under my thumb like ammunition. When people think their whispers are safe, a careful ear can turn them into proof. Ryan, completely ignorant and hungry for the deal, began to speed things up. He wanted to sell closed before anyone could question it. That haste was his undoing. He instructed his accountants to revalue assets aggressively, to shift liabilities off the books into entities that I now owned shares in, and to clean the books by pushing questionable payments into supposed consultancy contracts. He even used a forged signature on an emergency delegation letter to make some board members think I de-delegated my authority while I was supposedly incapacitated. Every hurried move left a trail. Timestamps, duplicate invoices, a consulting firm with no website but a registered address in an empty office park. I almost had to smile at the simplicity of it all. He was literally building the trap for himself. Haste always hides the shovel that digs a man's grave, if you know where to look for it. At times, I thought about just calling the police and dragging the whole sordid story into the light, but I wanted a more lasting lesson than jail time could ever deliver. Jail will punish us for a season. Public ruin and financial collapse. They teach differently. I wanted Ryan to lose more than just his money. I wanted him to watch his empire dissolve, to hear his name echo in the mouths of gossips like a cautionary tale, and to feel the quiet, creeping shame that comes from knowing everyone he ever charmed was only ever a step away from turning on him. So, I built pressure points instead. Press leaks, timed perfectly with the next board meeting, anonymous tips to the internal audit team, and a proxy shareholder motion to freeze the sale until a full forensic audit could be completed. Each pressure point was like a pin. When pulled in the right order, the whole scheme would tighten around him. Justice that whispers will always last longer than vengeance that shouts. If you're invested in seeing how this story unfolds, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, so you won't miss the next chapter. We're just getting started. My plan started small, a single drop in a big pond. I sent an anonymous memo to Janet Miller, a local newspaper editor who'd helped me before. Primera entered some irregularities at the firm, suggesting she look into the sudden changes since my accident. Janet, bless her heart, loves digging for a good local story. She sniffed around and wrote a careful, measured piece. It wasn't a bombshell, just enough to make the board members a little nervous. Back in the office, I saw Ryan's smile finally crack as he read it on his phone. He realized the story wasn't going away. You see, the media doesn't need to shout to be heard. Sometimes, a single, quiet headline is all it takes to make a powerful man start sweating. Trust, the invisible currency of any company, began to evaporate. A few older directors, loyal to me for years, started sending me private messages. "Are you sure you're okay?" they'd ask, their voices low. Others started backing away from Ryan's rushed plans, demanding more documents, more time. This gave my old friend Marcus the opening he needed. He called for a closed session audit, cloaking it under the guise of shareholder due diligence. This is where Ryan started to stumble. When the auditors asked for documents he couldn't produce without exposing the fraudulent transfers, he tried to bluff his way through. He sent me private messages, calling me a coward, swearing he'd push the sale through no matter what. Those messages were exactly what I needed. He was cornered, and when a man shouts too loudly, his own echo becomes the sound of his downfall. The hardest part of all this was Lily, my daughter, caught in the middle. The pain of seeing her suffer hurt more than any broken bone ever could. She started calling me more, her voice small and scared. She asked if she should testify, go to the police, or just leave Ryan. I told her, very carefully, to start a journal, to write down everything, dates, comments, any strange requests Ryan made. She did it faithfully, hiding the little notebook under her pillow. Those quiet entries, scribbled in the dark, later became the crucial evidence we needed. They showed a pattern of pressure and manipulation that no financial ledger ever could. It's a powerful reminder that courage doesn't always roar. Sometimes, It just quietly writes down the truth. With the pieces in place, my strategy shifted. I moved from passive waiting to actively dismantling his scheme. I filed a confidential complaint with a regulatory body, using the forged documents as my first piece of evidence. This wasn't to get an immediate result, but to get an official file started. Official processes are slow, but they leave a very clear trail. At the same time, I started a whisper campaign among our major clients. I made sure a few key investors became curious about the firm's sudden changes in valuation. One by one, clients started demanding their own independent audits. The board, terrified of a market panic, finally froze the sale and called an emergency meeting. I could almost feel the panic coming from Ryan's office, the late-night texts, the frantic calls to offshore partners. His thin veneer of control was cracking. When the market smells blood, even the most powerful CEO becomes a guest at his own funeral. There were moments I felt like giving up. Moments this whole plan felt like a dark fantasy. But then I'd remember the sound of the train whistle, the cold metal against my back, and Ryan's laugh as he pushed me. I'd remember lying in that hospital bed, listening to doctors talk about how lucky I was. Lucky? Luck without justice is a cold comfort. This wasn't just about revenge. This was about correcting a history that greed had tried to rewrite. It was about my life's work, my daughter's trust, and the dignity of what I had built from the ground up. Every leak, every whispered rumor, was a step toward taking back what was stolen. Sometimes, the point of punishment isn't to inflict pain. It's to repair what was broken. The emergency board meeting was the moment of truth. When the documents were demanded, Ryan, in a full-blown panic, produced invoices with fake contractor names and references that led nowhere. Then, a senior auditor from the city walked in. In the silence of that room, all of Ryan's bravado just dissolved. Marcus joined me on a secure video line, a legal warrior ready for the final battle. When the forensic team uncovered the fake shell company he was using to route funds, you could have heard a pin drop. One of the directors whispered, "He forged your signature." For the first time, the accusation was laid bare for everyone to see. Ryan's face went pale, the color of old, forgotten paper. Expose the ledger, and you expose the soul behind it. That night, with the board stunned and the auditors compiling their report, Ryan did exactly what desperate men do. He lashed out. He sent emails trying to smear me, suggesting I was mentally unfit, that I was manipulating my own family. He yelled down the phone at people who once looked up to him. He made the classic mistake of a man under pressure. He lied, but louder and more recklessly this time, handing the audit team even more proof of his deception. Marcus had predicted he would do this. I just sat in my room, my cane leaning against the couch, and honestly, I felt a strange sense of pity for him. Greed always has one last, ugly gasp, and it always looks just like panic. As the forensic report grew, the company's reputation shrank. Clients put major deals on hold. The very investor Ryan had been trying so hard to impress pulled out completely after seeing the preliminary findings. The stock started to tank. In a tearful call, Ryan begged Lily to stand by him publicly. Trembling, but resolute, she refused. That little notebook she'd kept hidden under her mattress was quietly handed over to Marcus and added to the official regulatory complaint. Her secret courage became a mirror held up to Ryan's face, and he couldn't stand the reflection. It turns out, a single page of truth is all it takes to shatter a life built on lies. Your support means the world. Stay safe and stay strong. My final step was psychological. I requested a private meeting with the board, pretending I was there to retract my claims and step aside. It was a performance designed to make Ryan think I was surrendering. I walked into that room with my cane, breathing slow and heavy like an old man, and I watched him puff up with arrogance, believing victory was his. But then, Marcus began. He presented the evidence we'd compiled, document by document, email by email, witness by witness. The mood in the room shifted, first confusion, then betrayal, and finally, resolve. They voted to suspend Ryan immediately, pending a full investigation, and to start a recovery plan to secure the company's assets. He left that room like a man stripped of his costume, exposed and small. I didn't feel glee. I just felt the soft, quiet weight of things finally being set right. Let the board see the truth, and the guilty man will stand naked in a room full of judgment. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift. Regulators opened formal inquiries, clients filed civil suits. Ryan's creditors began asking uncomfortable questions he couldn't answer. He tried to sell what assets he could to launder his way out of the mess, but the forensic net had already closed around him. He called my rented number once. His voice cracked as he pleaded for mercy, but I didn't answer. When Lily found out the full extent of his plans to sell the firm and run with the Monashi, packed a small bag and left his house, she came to see me, not as an accuser, but as a daughter trying to understand how we had reached this tragic end and, more importantly, how we could start to rebuild. When the last door closes on deception, the first door opens for truth. I didn't feel triumphant. The cost of this fight had been steep. The bruises on my ribs had faded long ago. But the memory of that shove, it remained a scar in a place no one can see. Justice had arrived, slow and exact, not because I wanted vengeance for its own sake, but because I demanded accountability. Ryan would face his legal consequences, and the company would be stabilized under new leadership, with a clear mandate to repair the damage. More importantly, Lily had her dignity back. She started helping me with the soft work of rebuilding trust with our clients and employees. For the first time since that day on the tracks, I felt held again not by the law, but by people who chose to stand for what was right. Justice that rebuilds does more than just punish. It repairs the house that greed tried to burn down. One night, I stood by the window of my small rented room, watching the train tracks, the same ones where he'd left me for dead. A freight train thundered past, shaking the glass. Primera vez, in letting the vibration move through my old bones. Surviving had given me more than a second chance at life. It had given me back my voice. I learned to use it gently, precisely, with the care of an old man who knows the difference between making noise and making real change. Ryan's fall would be public and slow. He would have time to reflect on the man he had been and wonder how he became so small. And if that sight humbles him, if it makes him stop before he ever hurts another person, then that, more than anything, would be my true victory. Survival isn't the end. It's the beginning of a very different kind of justice. The morning after Ryan's suspension, I woke before dawn. The old cabin was cold, the kind of chill that seeps into your bones and reminds you of every year of your age. I brewed some coffee, sat by the small window, and watched the frost creep across the glass. The world outside was still, but in Sidame, a quiet storm had finally begun to settle. For months, revenge had been the fuel that kept me going, but now, with Ryan's downfall in motion, something else started to rise in its place. A question. What do you do after justice has been served? Sometimes, getting even just leaves you standing in the ruins, wondering what winning really means. By mid-morning, Marquez called. His voice had that calm satisfaction lawyers get when a case turns out exactly as they planned. "It's happening, George," he said. The board filed their formal report with the regulators last night. Ryan's travel is frozen. They found more offshore accounts, this time tied to his mother's name. The net's closing. I didn't celebrate. He just nodded, though he couldn't see it. I'd imagined this day for months. The day the man who nearly killed me would finally face the music. But now that it was real, it felt heavy. This was justice that came at a cost. Every victory has a receipt, and justice often demands payment in quiet loneliness. Later that week, the newspapers caught fire with the story. Local CEO accused of fraud and forgery. They didn't use my name, but everyone knew who the retired founder was. The phone that only Marcus and Lily knew about started buzzing. Messages from people I hadn't spoken to in years. Some offered sympathy, others wanted gossip, and a few even tried to apologize for siding with Ryan. I didn't answer any of them. You see, forgiveness is a complicated thing. It's not a door you can just open while the house is still on fire. Forgiveness isn't weakness. It's timing. You can't heal while the wound is still bleeding. Stay safe, and always stand for what's right. Lily came to visit me again, and this time, she was different. She carried a small suitcase, but more importantly, she carried a sense of peace I hadn't seen in her eyes for years. As she sat by the window, sipping tea, I was buried in the latest documents Marcus had sent over. The evidence was overwhelming. The case was solid. She watched the steam rise from her cup, then looked at me, her voice barely a whisper. "He's really going to jail, isn't he?" I put the papers down and looked at my daughter. In that moment, she wasn't the young woman who had just endured a world of betrayal. She was the little girl who used to chase fireflies in our garden, her face full of wonder. Seeing her grapple with this hard truth, this painful reality, felt more significant than any court verdict. This was her moment of closure. I let the silence hang for a beat before I answered. "Yes," I said softly. "He is. But Lily, I don't want you to hate him. Just learn from him." Tears welled up in her eyes, but she didn't break. She nodded, her voice steady as she whispered, "I hate what he did, not who he is." In that instant, I saw it so clearly. She had inherited her mother's strengths, quiet, steady, and absolutely unbreakable. Raising a strong child doesn't mean protecting them from the world. It means teaching them how to survive when the world tries to break in them what it once broke in you. A week later, the firm called a public meeting. The air in the boardroom was thick with tension and unspoken guilt. The board reinstated me as an honorary chairman. It wasn't a position of power. I wasn't there to lead. My role was to advise, to guide them as they began the long, arduous process of cleaning up the mess Ryan had created. To be honest, I didn't want power anymore. I just wanted to see integrity restored to the company I had built from the ground up. Walking into the office for the first time since the accident was a surreal experience. People stared. Some looked shocked to see me on my feet. Others couldn't meet my gaze. Their guilt was so palpable. A few people offered quiet, hesitant applause. I just gave a simple nod in return. The same marble floors that once echoed with Ryan's arrogant strides now felt different under my cane. Every tap was a rhythm, a reminder. It was a slow, deliberate sound, a testament to the fact that time and truth move much slower than greed, but they never, ever stop moving. Truth may take the long, winding road, but it always reaches the finish line. During that meeting, I saw faces I hadn't seen in years. In the corner, almost hidden in the shadows, stood Michael, my old business partner. His eyes were full of regret. After the meeting wrapped up, he approached me, his steps hesitant. "George," he started, his voice strained. I stopped him with a small shake of my head. There was no anger left in me, only a deep sense of weary understanding. "You believed what everyone else did," I told him quietly. "You saw what he wanted you to see." He looked down at the floor, ashamed. "Still," he whispered, "you didn't deserve any of this." A faint smile touched my lips. "Maybe not," I conceded, "but maybe I needed it." He frowned, confused by my words. I leaned a little closer and added, "Sometimes life has to break your heart, just to remind you it's still beating. The deepest betrayals, the ones that cut you to the bone, serve a strange purpose. They remind you that you're still alive, even when the pain feels like it's going to swallow you whole." The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of court hearings, asset freezes, and endless, sensationalized news reports. Ryan's legal team tried every trick in the book. They attempted to paint him as a victim, a young, ambitious man who was manipulated and pressured by older executives. It was a desperate, flimsy narrative. The documents, the emails, the voice recordings, they all told a different story. The evidence was irrefutable. One by one, Even his closest allies began to withdraw their support, leaving him isolated. By February, his carefully constructed public mask had crumbled into dust. Every time I saw his face on the news pale, exhausted, clutching a handful of papers as he rushed past a throng of reporters, I felt a strange mix of sadness and closure. It wasn't pity, and it certainly wasn't triumph. It was just the final, quiet understanding that greed is a cannibal. It eats its own children. When you let greed feast for long enough, it will eventually turn and start eating the very hand that fed it. While the legal battle raged on, Lily found her own way to heal. She started working part-time at a small community center, teaching financial literacy to single mothers. She told me she wanted to help people who had trusted the wrong hands. One afternoon, I stood across the street and watched her from afar. She was at the front of a small classroom, speaking to a room full of women. I saw their faces. They were strong, determined, and hopeful. And Lily, my Lily, was their guide. That was her healing. That was her revenge, turning her own pain into purpose for others. And I realized in that moment that maybe that's what a true legacy is. It's not the buildings you erect or the numbers on a balance sheet. It's the lessons that grow from the soil of what you've survived. Revenge fades into the background. A legacy lasts forever. One evening, as the first hints of spring began to warm the air, I took Lily to the old train station. It had recently been rebuilt, all modern lights and polished floors. She had no idea why I'd brought her there. "Dad, why are we here?" she asked, her voice gentle. I stared out at the tracks, at the cold, hard steel that had once almost claimed my life. "Because this is where it all began," I said, my voice thick with emotion, "and this is where it ends." She took my arm, and we stood there in silence, listening to the world move around us. A train thundered past, and the rumble vibrated through my bones. A familiar, ghostly echo. "You ever wonder," I said, looking at the departing train, "if life gives you a second chance, not to do things differently, but to finish what you couldn't before?" She squeezed my arm and a small, knowing smile played on her lips. "Maybe this was your way of finishing, Dad." She was right. The very place that tried to end you can become the place where you truly begin again. When Ryan's trial began in early summer, the courtroom was packed. It was a spectacle. Journalists scribbled furiously in their notepads. Old colleagues I hadn't seen in years filled the benches, and even some of his former friends were there. Their faces a mixture of curiosity and morbid fascination. I sat quietly in the back, my hat in my hand, my cane resting against the seat next to me. When they brought him in, he was a shadow of his former self. Thinner, his eyes hollowed out, the arrogant swagger of the untouchable golden boy completely gone. When his lawyer spotted me in the gallery, I saw a flicker of surprise in his eyes, even a flash of fear. I didn't react. I didn't speak. I didn't glare. I simply watched. The prosecution methodically laid out their case. Forged documents, rampant fraud, attempted financial manipulation, obstruction of justice. The mountain of evidence was staggering. When Ryan took the stand to deny the charges, his voice shook, betraying his feigned confidence. The judge listened patiently, her expression calm and completely unimpressed. Then the verdict came. Guilty on multiple counts. There was no applause, no triumphant shouting. Just silence. A heavy, absolute silence that filled every corner of the room. It was in that profound quiet that I understood something fundamental. Sometimes, the quietest moments are the ones that carry the loudest, most undeniable justice. My fight was over. The truth had finally come home. The reporters tried to swarm me as I left the courthouse, their questions a barrage of noise. I just kept walking. I wasn't the story anymore. Not really. The real story was what happens when unchecked pride smacks into unyielding truth. It's the story of a man who believed he could control every outcome, only to find out that life, eventually, always balances its own books. Lily and I walked down the courthouse steps, side by side. The sun felt warm, like a new beginning. She slipped her hand into mine and whispered, "He looked like a stranger." I nodded, squeezing her hand gently. "He always was. You know, you only really see a person for who they are when they've lost everything they tried to hide behind." In the months that followed, the company began to recover. It was slow, painful, but for the first time in a long time, it was a nest. I went to a few meetings, offering what little guidance I could, but mostly, I stayed home. I found a new kind of purpose in my small garden. For years, I had been obsessed with building things, companies, investments, empires of concrete and steel. Now, I found a quiet peace in growing tomatoes and sunflowers. Every seed I planted felt like a small act of rebellion against everything Ryan stood for. Maybe that was the real ending. Not Ryan's downfall, but the simple reminder that redemption doesn't always come from those who fall. Sometimes, it comes from those who learn from the fall. Revenge, I realized, just ends a chapter. But redemption, that begins a story truly worth reading. That night, as I sat on my porch watching the fireflies drift through the cool air, I thought about everything I'd lost and everything I'd gained. I thought about Lily's incredible strength, about Marcus's unwavering loyalty, and about the quiet justice that had finally unfolded not through violence or anger, but through simple truth. I wasn't the same man who had fallen onto those train tracks all those months ago. I was older, sure, but I also felt lighter, calmer. I had carried the suffocating weight of vengeance for so long. Now, it was time to carry peace. And sometimes, the heaviest thing you can possibly let go of is the justice you've already achieved. The months after the trial passed, in a quiet rhythm, summer slowly melted into fall, and the air started to carry that crisp scent of turning leaves, that strange, beautiful blend of endings and new beginnings. My days found a new, peaceful tempo. Morning coffee on the porch, a slow walk to the mailbox, tending to my garden, and evenings spent reading old books I never had time for before. For the first time in years, I wasn't fighting anyone. I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was just living. But peace. Peace has a funny way of feeling unfamiliar when you've spent too long living in chaos. Sometimes I'd wake up before dawn, my heart racing, expecting bad news, another betrayal waiting on the line. It took time to understand that not every silence is hiding a danger. Some silences are just peace. When you've been through a hurricane, the calm that follows feels suspicious, until you finally realize it's something you've earned. Lily came by often. We'd sit by the garden, and her laughter mixed with the soft hum of the bees. She looked happier, freer. One evening, she told me she was dating someone new, a man named Daniel who taught at her center. "He's quiet, Dad. Patient," she said, her eyes bright. "He doesn't care about money. He cares about purpose." I smiled, though a small, scarred part of me flinched. "That's good," I said softly. "Just make sure he's not quiet for the wrong reasons." She laughed, a sound like wind chimes. "You still don't trust men, do you?" I looked at her, my daughter, so strong and full of light. After a moment I replied, "I trust you, Lily, and that's enough." Sometimes, trust doesn't return all at once. It returns through the people who never broke it in the first place. That night, after she left, I sat alone, watching the taillights of her car fade down the long road. A strange thought crossed my mind. What if Ryan ever sought forgiveness? What would I even say to him? Could I ever truly let go of what he did? I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that holding on to all that anger had aged me faster than time ever could. A week later, Marcus called. His tone was somber. "George," he said, "Ryan's been moved to the state penitentiary. He's filed for a reduction, but it's not looking good for him." I was silent for a moment, the past rushing back in. "Did he ask about me?" Marcus hesitated. "He did. He said he wants to meet." "I didn't plan for you to die." I was just so angry. I lost control. And when you fell, I just froze. I thought if I ran, it would all go away. But it never did. It haunts me. Every single night, I see your face in that moment. I ruined everything. Primera ruined. Lily's trust, your company, my own life. I'm not asking you, for a second chance. Just a chance to say I'm sorry. Ryan. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. I read it twice, my hands trembling slightly. The anger that once flared at the mention of his name, Ryan, just didn't come. Instead, I felt something hollow, empty, like the echo of a fire long since burned out. I folded the letter, put it back in the envelope, and placed it in a drawer. I didn't write back. Not yet. I was learning that forgiveness doesn't start with words. It starts with the decision to stop your own bleeding. Weeks pass. One crisp October morning, as I was trimming the hedges, a black car pulled into my driveway. Marcus, my old colleague, stepped out, holding a thin envelope. His face said it all before he even spoke. "It's Ryan," he said softly. "He's gone." Apparently, there'd been a fight in prison, nothing dramatic. Just another quiet, brutal story swallowed by the system. I stood there for a long while, the shears still in my hands. I didn't cry. I didn't rage. I just stared at the sky and whispered, "It's over." Some stories don't end with a bang. They just finally stop hurting. A few weeks after that, I found another envelope in my mailbox. This one was from a law firm I didn't recognize. Inside was a short letter and a small, tarnished key. The note read, "Per Mr. Ryan Coldwell's final request. You've been listed as the recipient of his private storage unit. He stated that its contents belonged to you." I stared at the letter for what felt like an eternity, unsure whether to laugh or weep. It felt like one last test from fate, or maybe from Ryan himself. A final, ghostly hand reaching out from the past. What could he possibly want to give me? A week later, I drove to the address on the letter. The storage unit was small, barely lit by a single flickering bulb. Inside were dusty boxers, old papers, and a small metal safe. I hesitated, then used the key. The lock clicked open. Inside were items I hadn't seen since before the betrayal. My original company seal, my late wife's silver locket, the blueprints for our first factory, and a single, faded photograph. It was of my daughter, Lily, as a child, sitting on Ryan's shoulders, both of them smiling, radiant. On the back, in his familiar scroll, he had written, "For what it's worth, thank you for giving me a chance to be part of something good, even if I ruined it." I stood there, the smell of dust and regret thick in the air, and for the first time, I felt something close to forgiveness. Not for his sake, but for mine. Because forgiving doesn't erase the past. It just stops it from owning your future. That winter, the world seemed quieter. My daughter, Lily, and her fiancé, Daniel, got engaged. They had a small, intimate ceremony right here in the garden I'd planted from scratch after everything fell apart. As I watched her walk down the little stone path, hand in hand with him, a profound realization hit me. Ryan had almost destroyed me, but in the end, his betrayal had unintentionally rebuilt something even stronger. He had forced me to confront my own pride. He made Lily find her voice. He reminded us both what truly mattered. Sometimes, the villain's greatest act is forcing the hero to rise. After the wedding, I went back to that same train station one last time. The place where my world had shattered. I stood by the tracks, leaning on my cane, and closed my eyes. The sound of the distant rumble filled the air, but it wasn't threatening this time. It was rhythmic, almost comforting. I whispered into the wind, "You took my peace once. Now, I take it back." A single tear slipped down my cheek, not from sadness, but from release. The real revenge isn't destruction. It's finding peace in the very place they tried to break you. Months later, I donated the items from the storage unit to a local museum, under the simple title, "The Price of Trust." They asked if I wanted to include my name in the exhibition. I said no. The story was enough. Let it speak for itself. One evening, Lily visited me with her newborn son, my grandson. His name, she told me, was Ryan Thomas Grant. I looked at her, surprised, maybe even a little shocked. She just smiled softly. "Not after him," she said. After forgiveness, after moving on. And in that moment, holding that small, sleeping child, I finally understood. Revenge might set the record straight, but forgiveness writes the final chapter. The years that followed were quieter than I ever could have imagined. This old house stayed the same, creaking floors, humming refrigerator, the faint smell of pine wood in the mornings. But inside these walls, something fundamental had shifted. The air no longer felt heavy with regret. It felt lived in, warm, alive. My grandson, little Ryan, grew fast. Every time Lily visited, he'd run through the yard, chasing butterflies in his own laughter. I'd sit on the porch, Kane resting against my knee, pretending to read the newspaper while secretly watching him play. He'd trip, fall, get right back up, and run again. That simple resilience, that refusal to stay down, reminded me of the man I had become. The man I never thought I'd have the strength to be again. Sometimes, life gives you a second chance, and it's disguised as the laughter of a child. One evening, Lily brought me an old photo album. The cover was cracked, the pages yellowed. As we flipped through it, each photograph was a ghost from a past life. My wife in her garden, Lily's first steps, our family Christmases before everything fell apart. Then we turned a page, and there he was. A picture of a young, confident Ryan, smiling with his arm around my daughter. Lily froze for a moment, then quietly tried to turn the page. I reached out and gently stopped her hand. "It's okay," I said softly. "You don't have to hide him." She looked at me, her eyes uncertain. "But doesn't it hurt?" she asked. I smiled faintly. "It used to," I admitted. "But now, he's just part of the story. A dark chapter, yes, but part of it. Without the storm, we wouldn't appreciate the calm. Time doesn't erase scars. It just teaches you how to wear them as proof that you survived." After everything, I started writing again. Not business notes or financial ledgers, but stories, reflections, all the lessons I'd learned from a life that went from wealth to loss to a kind of wisdom I never asked for. I called it Tracks of Mercy. Honestly, it was never meant to be published. It was just something I wanted to leave behind for my granddaughter, Lily, and little Ryan. But life has a funny way of unfolding. Word got around through a friend of Marcus, and before I knew it, a small, local publisher reached out. They wanted to print my story. At first, I hesitated. It's a strange feeling, bearing your soul to the world, especially when that soul has seen betrayal and walked the path of vengeance. But Marcus, wise as ever, convinced me. He said, "People need stories like yours, stories that prove revenge can end in redemption." So, I agreed. The book came out quietly. There was no big launch, no press stir, nothing like that. Yet, somehow, it found its way into people's hands. Soon, letters started arriving from all over the country. Strangers would write things like, "Your story helped me forgive my brother," or "Your words stopped me from doing something I would have regretted for the rest of my life." I never expected my own pain could become someone else's healing. It taught me a profound lesson. When you share your scars, you're not showing weakness. You're giving others a map to find their own healing. A few years later, I was invited to speak at a local community center. They wanted me to talk about forgiveness and rebuilding trust. I had to laugh at first. "Are you sure you want an old banker to talk about trust?" But he made a ask at them. But he went. I stood on that small wooden stage, looking out at about 50 faces, and I decided to tell them the unpolished, raw truth. "I used to think revenge meant winning," I told them, "but revenge doesn't win. It only delays peace. The real victory, the real win, comes when you realize you can live a good life despite what they did to you. That's when you truly win." The room was silent. Then, a woman stood up and asked, "But what if the person who hurt you never apologizes?" I looked at her and said, "Then you have to forgive yourself for waiting on an apology you'll never get. Revenge ends one story. Forgiveness begins a whole new one." After that day, My life began to feel like borrowed time, but the good kind. I started planting new trees in the backyard, built a small wooden bench by the fence, and even painted the house a lighter color. When people would ask why I still lived in the same place where all the bad things started, I'd tell them, because it's where everything changed. And it was true. Those same floors that once echoed with loneliness now carried the pitter-patter of my great-grandson's little feet. Those same walls that had absorbed so much anger and silence now caught laughter and bedtime stories. Even the old train whistle in the distance didn't haunt me anymore. It just sounded like a heartbeat, steady, constant, forgiving. You see, peace doesn't come from running away from the past. It comes from rebuilding right in the middle of it. One afternoon, a letter arrived from the prison warden. It was an update, a list of inmates who had donated to charity from the work release program. As my eyes scanned the page, one name at the bottom stood out. The Ryan Caldwell Memorial Fund, supporting scholarships for at-risk youth. I just stared at it for a long, long time. I didn't know who had started it, or why. Maybe someone out there remembered him differently. Maybe it was Lily. Or maybe it was just karma, quietly closing the loop in its own way. Whatever it was, I felt something inside me loosen the last, stubborn piece of resentment finally letting go. It proved to me that even the cruelest endings can grow roots of redemption. As the years went on, people started recognizing me around town. "Hey, aren't you the man who wrote that book?" They ask. I'd just smile, nod, and usually say, "I'm just the man who lived it." And every single time I said those words, I felt a little lighter, a little more free. By my 70th birthday, the garden I'd planted was in full bloom. Lily and her husband, Daniel, hosted a small gathering in the backyard, just family and a few close friends. Little Ryan was running around with a slice of cake, laughing as he smeared frosting all over his face. My old friend Marcus stood beside me, his cane tapping lightly on the deck. "You know," he said with a grin, "if someone told me 10 years ago that you'd become a philosopher, I'd have laughed my head off." I chuckled. "So would I admitted. But I guess that's the thing about surviving. It forces you to grow in directions you never, ever planned. Survival isn't just about staying alive. It's about learning why you should. They say time heals all wounds. I used to laugh at that, because time alone doesn't heal anything. Time just gives you space. It's what you do with that space that decides who you become. Some people fill it with anger. Others fill it with regret. But if you're lucky or maybe just tired enough, you fill it with peace. I've lived 70 long years on this earth. I've seen fortunes made and lost, love given and betrayed, people rise and fall. But the hardest thing I ever had to learn wasn't how to fight back. It was how to stop fighting, how to stop replaying the same pain like a broken record and finally let silence have its turn. The final stage of revenge isn't triumph, it's understanding. When Ryan pushed me onto those tracks, he thought he was ending a chapter. In reality, he just forced me to rewrite it. The man I was before that day was proud, sharp, maybe even a little arrogant. I measured my worth in what I built, in the respect I commanded. But life has a cruel way of stripping you down until you realize what truly matters. It wasn't wealth. It wasn't power. It wasn't even revenge. It was grace. Grace is the quiet revenge that time delivers when anger finally burns out. Ryan's story ended the way all greedy stories do, in dust and echoes. But mine went on, not because I was stronger, but because I chose to be better. That's something people don't tell you about karma. It doesn't always punish with fire. Sometimes it redeems through wisdom. It makes you walk through darkness just to teach you the value of light. Now, when I sit by the garden in the evenings, I watch little Ryan playing with his mother, and I think, maybe this was the point of it all. Maybe life isn't about erasing pain, but about transforming it, about taking something broken and building something that can't be destroyed. What they meant for your ending can become your beginning, if you let Italiano. I don't hate Ryan anymore. In some strange, distant way. I even thank him, because without his betrayal, I would have never learned forgiveness. Without his greed, I would have never learned peace. Without his cruelty, I would have never rediscovered kindness. And as I close this story, I realize something profound. Revenge may satisfy the heart for a moment, but forgiveness feeds the soul forever. As night falls, my family gathers around the fire pit. The air is cool, the flames soft. My daughter Lily leans against me and says, "Dad, I think Mom would be proud of you." I look up at the sky, stars scattered like diamonds across the black canvas. "I hope she is," I whisper. I finally learned what she always tried to teach me. Kindness isn't weakness, it's strength under control. The strongest people aren't those who fight the hardest, but those who know when to stop when it's over. Before going to bed that night, I step outside one last time. The moon hangs low over the hills. I can hear the faint sound of the train passing in the distance. The same tracks, the same sound, but this time it feels like closer, like a chapter closing softly instead of slamming shut. Revenge truly ends when the heart finally learns peace. So, if anyone listening finds themselves betrayed, discarded, or broken, remember this. The real power isn't in what you take back. It's in what you refuse to let them take from you. Your peace, your dignity, your goodness. Those are yours to keep, no matter what they do. Life will test you. People will hurt you. But karma never forgets. It just waits until you're ready to watch justice unfold without needing to lift a finger. Let karma do its work. Your job is to survive long enough to see it. Because at the end of the day, that's what I did. I survived, and survival quiet, steady, peaceful survival is the greatest revenge of all. Revenge makes you even. Forgiveness makes you free.